All right, everybody, we're back. I'm Kevin. This is the Listening Game Podcast. This is episode 5. I'm really excited about this one. A dear friend from Heroes of the Storm team, that's Team 1, Blizzard Entertainment, still working on that incredibly fond and wonderful game. None other than Kyle Dates, designer. Dude, thank you for being here.
Wow, thank you so much for having me.
Dude, I'm stoked, man. I can't wait to talk games. Can't wait to talk whatever. We got this quiet house. By the way, this is my house, everyone. That's exactly where we are on the set.
We are.
I didn't mention that in episode 4. But we're trying to find a committed place to do this podcast. So if you have a space that's just lying dormant out there where we can set up cameras and leave them, please do let me know. But for now, we're in my home.
Where was episode 1 through 3?
Yeah. Episode 1 through 3 was the apartment of Kara LaForge.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah. Do you know Kara?
I know who she is.
I worked on the esports team at Blizzard, and super dear friend, and really supportive of everything I'm trying to do. And
awesome.
Yeah, so she let me bring all this stuff in and kind of totally destroy her apartment.
Yeah, I can imagine.
No, Kara, we put it all back, I swear. But yeah, that's where episodes 1 through 3 took place. So anyways, Kyle, thank you for being here. As you know, on this podcast, we're talking about game development.
Yeah.
I think, the number one reason I have felt compelled to do this is just to have a forum where developers can talk about the complexities and the nuances of making games that I think sometimes the enthusiast doesn't have insight on. Making games is incredibly challenging, and a lot of that stuff often gets kind of shielded from the average gamer. John Jelnick, who was our last episode, is a really great inside look at talking through the kind of struggles that Carbine had on WildStar. And I think as a gamer, you kind of don't get a chance to see just how much a team like that on the inside was battling on vision or alignment, or managing just the conundrum of production on a game of that scale, right? And all you see is the end product, and you're kind of like, is this fun or not, right? But there's so much more behind it that that brings context. And so I think my hope with this podcast is to bring a bigger sense of context to how games are made, the kind of passion and enthusiasm that gets put into them, but also just the general challenges. So anyways, excited to hear a bit more about the design side, and want to hear more about your journey and how it all began. And I know we have quite some overlap with both StarCraft II and Heroes. And so we come from some of the same, I guess you would say, design culture, which is cool.
Yeah.
But take me back to square one, man. How did you get into games, and certainly how did you find your way to Blizzard?
Yeah. So it all started, back when I was a teenager playing. At the time, I was playing EverQuest every day. Just kind of spending my life playing MMOs. Growing up. And I was a huge Blizzard game fan back then too. I was playing, Warcraft II, Warcraft III, StarCraft. I loved StarCraft. It was one of my favorite games of all time. And I got that game when I was around, I think, 6th or 7th grade. And I noticed that, I'd known this from Warcraft 2, which had a map editor. And then StarCraft also had a map editor, which I basically fell in love with. I ended up liking making maps and creating things more than I even liked playing the game. I used to play ladder all the time, and then, ladder was just joining games back then. There was no ladder. But, I would spend time playing the game, and then I was like, man, I could just make some cool stuff. I just want to make stuff all the time. And that got me into the custom game scene. And I just spent a ton of time just making maps in the editor. And then after that is when I started playing EverQuest. So I kind of dropped out of it. I was still doing it on the side, but mostly just playing this super addictive MMO. Yeah. And eventually Blizzard announced World of Warcraft and Warcraft 3 in between. So I played Warcraft 3. It also obviously had the map editor, which I fell in love with yet again. It was stage 2 of the romance. And when World of Warcraft came out, played that a ton. Still making maps here and there. I started exploring other games, other map tools and game creation tools and things like that. And around the time, it was shortly before Burning Crusade came out for World of Warcraft, so about a 2007 timeframe.
By the way, what class did you play in the original WoW?
So I had such a crazy story with that. So I started off as an undead warrior.
Okay.
because I played a Tauren warrior in beta.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it just felt too bulky for me. I wanted the undeads just look so cool, and Will the Forsaken was so OP that I was
how
like, okay.
they walk so cool.
Yeah.
The vocal effects are so cool. Yeah.
So when launch hit, I switched to undead, and then I played undead warrior to level 58.
Wow.
At which point, me and my trio, we had a trio. It was me, another warrior, and a mage. We're gonna join a guild together, which the guild was nerfed on the Archimon server, and the guild actually was pretty much full on warriors. And my friend, my warrior friend, was very adamant on staying a warrior. So I was like, you know what? I'll just re-roll, because they really desperately needed a druid.
Okay.
So I was like, all right, I'm gonna make a druid. So I'm back on Tauren, which I didn't want to be in the first place. So I leveled up to 60 again as a druid back in Classic WoW, which was extremely slow.
Dude, it takes a long time. And that was when people didn't know the game. There
yeah,
wasn't,
no one knew anything.
And how to do quests. And
there was like Thoughtbot and stuff like that, but
Alakazam.
Yeah, it wasn't nearly as good as it is today.
Yeah.
So I leveled up to 60, which took a while, and I raided as a druid for quite a while. And I was just like, man, I'm so sick of this. Like, I didn't play Tauren for a reason. I can't stand playing druid. It's super boring. Like, at least for me. I was like, I want to do damage. I was one of those people, you know?
Yeah.
And so I basically re-rolled it again.
Oh my!
I was like, I'm doing it. So I re-rolled Orc Hunter, because orcs are awesome.
Yeah, totally.
And quickly leveled to 60 this time.
Yeah.
Because now not only did I know what was going on, but also hunters were just crazy fast.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I get to 60, keep raiding. We're one of the top raid guilds in all of World of Warcraft, as well as one of the top PvP guilds. So we had kind of a reputation that we were, rolling with. And around that time, a lot of people from the guild started getting picked up by Blizzard. Actually, multiple people. And I had some friends who were already working at Blizzard, and they were like, "Hey, you should come apply. Like, we could probably get you a job. If you could come work in QA with us." And at that time, it was a bunch of my friends that were working in QA. So I was like, all right, I'm living in Florida at the time.
Wow.
So I'm like, man, moving to California, I'm literally 20 years old.
Right.
So it's like a pretty big deal to like apply to this company on the other side of the country.
Yeah.
When I've lived in Florida my entire life. And I sent my application in. I flew out here for BlizzCon in 2007, which I think was BlizzCon number 2.
Yeah, that's really right.
That was when StarCraft II was playable for the first time. On the show floor. You could play as Terran and Protoss, and that's no Zerg. There was no Zerg at all.
Wow.
And so obviously I had to play StarCraft 2 because that was my first time. I knew the game was coming. I was super excited about it, being a huge StarCraft 1 fan.
Yeah.
And so I got a chance to speak with some of the managers, some of the people that worked in the QA department, and I got home, and about 3 days later they were like, "Hey, when can you start?"
Wow.
So I was like, holy cow, that's so fast. I was not ready for this.
That's not normal nowadays.
No.
things have
World
changed.
of Warcraft was blowing up. They were just like,
they
needed people. Yeah. There's a big call to arms for just like, man, this game is way beyond, I think, what anyone imagined for World of Warcraft. And Burning Crusade was, just around the corner.
Yeah.
So they were just like, what's after that, right? And of course, we now know Wrath of the Lich King, which I believe was when World of Warcraft hit its peak. Which was, one of the biggest expansions at the time. I mean, it was the biggest expansion at the time, but it was one of the biggest in terms of like player numbers.
Totally,
and, hype for the game.
So
I started off about a month later, actually. Well, let's see. I think BlizzCon was in August, like mid-August, and then my start date was September 10th. So it was very quick turnaround, less than a month from just getting my application and stuff in to getting picked up and starting on my first day.
Wow.
And I started with like 12 other people or so. So it was a nice little sized group of us.
Yeah.
And we were in night crew QA, just learning how to test, learning how the game industry works. All of us were pretty fresh. Like none of us had really had any previous experience working on games. And obviously I was immediately drawn to like, I want to work on StarCraft II. Like, I'd been playing World of Warcraft, and I kind of was starting to burn out of it, and I just wasn't feeling it as much, and the thought of working on, StarCraft II, which is like my dream game, was it was overwhelming.
Right.
So when I came onto the team, I basically just started telling I started learning, first of all, obviously, learning, absorbing as much knowledge as possible. Just how does this stuff work? How does QA work? Trying to be as good at being a tester as I was at playing the game.
Sure.
And eventually I started being like, hey, I would really love to work on StarCraft. I have all this experience playing StarCraft. I know a ton about the game. And then I started like kind of showing like, hey, also I know how to use editors. Like I've been making games my whole life. And the map editor for StarCraft II was obviously the tool that the dev team used to make the game.
Right.
And they really needed people in QA to test it, because when a developer was working in the editor and the editor would crash, they would lose hours of work.
Right.
And that's really awful, right? Because, you know, if you didn't have a backup save, or you forgot to save because it's early in the morning and whatever, like you would lose hours of work, maybe unique stuff that'll never be, you know, captured again potentially. And so they really needed testers to kind of just throw everything you have at it and figure out like what the ins and outs of it are, what makes it crash, what makes it break. And so that way the devs can make the game easier.
Yeah.
So that ended up being where I kind of found myself.
That's cool.
The team was only about 3 people. It was 3 of us, you know, just testing the editor basically. Not
just stretching it and, you know, pushing it.
Yeah. Just like, and the best way to do that was to make content,
to make it,
because like I'm not gonna, like I can go click all the buttons and they're gonna work in a vacuum, but it's when I'm stressing it by having all these things on the screen and trying to do all these weird things and tell the, you know, engine to do things that it wasn't meant to do is when I'm gonna break it. And so for like the next let's see, that was about 2007 until about 2010 when Wings of Liberty came out. I was just testing the editor. That's all I did.
Wow.
Who
were those other 2? Do you remember that?
So we had Justin Clinchu. We had a couple. We had like some rotations because Justin Clinchu was initially, I believe, the specialist, the map editor specialist. And so what he did, the specialist was kind of like the lead of testing in that area. So there was the lead of the whole team, which was kind of like, you know, controlling the direction of the testing and where to focus people and things like that. And then you had specialists, which were overseeing sections of the game. So for example, we had a multiplayer unit specialist who was in charge of testing all of the multiplayer units. And then we had a campaign specialist who was in charge of testing like all of the campaign missions and things like that. So everything was sectioned out. And the map editor was this tiny little team over here of 3 people, because like the other teams had 10, 12, sometimes 15 people. You know, because they're testing the whole entire game. So it was much bigger. And you know, we're this little like band of miscreants over here, you know, doing our best to break this tool that no one knows anything about.
Right. And there's
people would open the editor and be like, what do I do? Like,
there's no thumbnails, guys. There's no one wrote an instruction book to this.
There's there's basically, I mean, like documentation in game dev is a funny joke.
It's notoriously always bad. We're making tools that very few people know how to use because they're proprietary tools, and you just figure it out.
And that was the other thing, was that the StarCraft II editor was intended to go to the public. So not only did it need to work for the devs, but it also needed to be as bug-free as possible once it released, because there were all these grand plans for like the arcade and like all the custom maps. Obviously, the custom map community in Warcraft 3 and StarCraft were huge, so it needed to be able to hold up to that. So I mean, from there, you know, I was just testing the editor every day, making maps, learning how to use all the scripting and stuff, learning how to use data, how to make new units. And it got to the point where I started diagnosing bugs myself. You know, like someone on the multiplayer team would find a bug with a unit, like, oh, this upgrade doesn't do anything. And like I would go in the editor and be like, why not? You know, and I'd figure, oh, it's because this isn't hooked up to that, and that's why that's not working. So then they would put the bug in with extra information, where they're like, oh, I can see in the editor, you know, even though they didn't necessarily find it, or maybe they did, because I tried to teach people as much as possible. But now the dev goes in, they look at this bug that's just like perfectly documented. It's like, they already know what's wrong, so I'll just go fix it. Boom, you know, 5 minutes of searching around saved. 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, 10 minutes here, 20 minutes here. Suddenly, you know, you're fixing bugs much faster.
Who is this cow?
So that was kind of my thing. I did that until Wings of Liberty shipped, and then in between there, I worked on Wrath of the Lich King, because Wrath of the Lich King went into like, you know, we got to get this game out. So they pulled a lot of people back onto Wrath of the Lich King to help out with that. StarCraft II was still so far away that you know, there was no rush on anything. It was, the campaign was still coming together. Multiplayer was still changing, you know, daily drastically. And so 2010 Wings of Liberty shipped, and at that point, a bit of the team kind of rotated around. I actually became the map editor specialist at that point. So, you know, kind of the same deal, except now I'm in charge of, you know, telling people what to test and how to test, documenting things and kind of just making it easier for people to test the game. I spent a lot of time creating test maps, things where you load this map and it just spawns stuff in, kills it, attacks different things from different angles, just kind of like rapidly tests as much as possible. And there was a couple of us that were making maps, actually. Over time, we all kind of became more well-versed in using the tool. And after that, there was some designer positions that opened up on the StarCraft II team. They needed some extra designers for Heart of the Swarm.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, how do I not? Like, I had people coming out the day that they put the job things where you go and you see like, oh, they have positions open. When they open the position. I had people come up to me and being like, did you see? And I was like, see what? Because I hadn't seen it yet. And they're like, you don't know? Like, you're in. And I'm like, what do you mean? And they're like, they opened that for you, right? Like, they had to have. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. I literally had no idea. So I get back to my desk and I see that they had opened some positions. So, it was a no-brainer to apply. The downside at that time was that I had 3 days before I was leaving on a vacation for like 7 days.
Oh, man.
And in that time window, that was the deadline. So I had 3 days to basically go from, I sort of have this weird portfolio of like all these test maps and like some stuff that I made in the editor and like really old stuff from StarCraft II or StarCraft and Warcraft 3.
I'm sure you didn't even need it at that point, Kyle. They knew.
I threw it all in there anyway, and I did as best I could to get it all together. And, obviously, I mean, got the job. Been there since around 2012, working as a dev on Heart of the Swarm, Legacy of the Void, and then ultimately Heroes of the Storm, which is where I still am. That was a really long story.
No, dude, I love it. I love those early days. It's such a the story of how people get into game dev is so fascinating. I think especially now for those of us who kind of we're older, we have careers, but the path was never as clear as maybe it is now, like with school and school programs and things like that. So I find it super fascinating. And I think this one of modding games is pretty common because like you want to hire someone you can trust who kind of knows your tools, and it isn't necessarily someone with an early computer science degree that you're going to be like, yeah, that guy. It's like, no, I'd rather get the scrappy guy who's been messing around with like our tools than
it's true.
Even if they have no other experience in computer science, it's like, nah, that's the one.
Honestly, a lot of the non-technical skills for creating can be learned through just being with people who also create and having them share their lessons and things that they know. So the biggest hurdle, I think, is just the technical knowledge. There's so many people that struggle in that area, and I think that's one of the strongest areas. Like, if you know how to do the thing, you can learn everything else pretty easily.
Let's talk about this idea of design. I think it's super fascinating to me. Obviously, the concept of making games. And I'm assuming when you're making games, you want to make something that's fun. And doing that it's an interesting art, or it's an interesting talent, so to speak, I guess. But what do you think makes for a great designer? And what do you think makes for great design when you look at games? Now, obviously, the games you've been making are multiplayer games. They're competitive games.
For sure.
So there's probably quite a bit of
different.
new or unique standard put on multiplayer design than just any other game. But I don't know, I'm curious to get your take on design and what it's been like for you to grow into that role, especially as someone who is just kind of putting maps together. How do you get into becoming a seasoned artiste of a designer?
Honestly, becoming a designer is a lot of it's kind of a long path of trial and error. You don't really know what a good design is. Like that's kind of just this weird nebulous concept. Like, what is good design? And you kind of, at least when you start, right? Like, as a designer in the industry, you kind of have a good idea of what good design for the game that you're working on is, but that might not be the same for some other game. They might have different design values that change the way you have to look at things. Becoming a good designer is really, I think, in my opinion, one of the strongest skills you can have is just the ability to learn and adapt quickly and be much more open-minded. And it's a shame because I see a lot of junior designers, not necessarily like working on design teams, but just kind of wanting to get into the industry, or people who have a strong interest in game design. And I think one of the biggest lessons that they'll learn over time is they kind of have this idea that, like, I designed this thing, this is how it should work, this is the way the game should be. And that's really the wrong way to approach it, because that's almost never the way it actually works out, right? Like the way it usually works out is you say, I have this kind of cool idea, I think it's kind of cool, we're going to try it, and it's probably going to suck, and it's going to be awful, and then we're going to go from there, and we're going to kind of figure out how to make it good. Which is why like iteration is the key. You can't really, it's very
flexibility
rare.
too, like the need to be flexible with your perceptions in some ways, right?
Yeah, you got to be open-minded. You got to be willing to listen to feedback. It's a huge part of design. You can't really. Sometimes you'll hit the home runs, right?
Yeah.
Like super rarely. You'll be like you'll be sleeping. You'll have this idea. You'll come to work. You'll put it in, and boom, everyone loves it. It worked out exactly like you thought. That's so uncommon compared to I have this great idea. I come to work. I tell someone. They immediately poke like 20 holes in it, and I'm like, oh man, that wasn't okay. I got to go back to the drawing board. That's more commonly the case. So kind of just being adaptable, being able to be flexible in where you're going to go with something, because I think another strong skill is kind of like I come up with this idea, and I already know how I can change it in 10 different ways if a problem arises, right? Like if I have an idea for an ability for a hero, for example. I might have, several different versions of that ability that kind of do what the core idea of the ability is. Like if I want the ability to be like a damaging AoE ability, I might have several different variations of it that I'm ready to just jump to if a problem comes up with this one, or if someone finds some kind of weird, if you combine this with this, and all the weird design noodly stuff that happens. It's definitely just being flexible, being adaptable.
Absolutely. That's really cool.
Feedback is huge.
Let's talk a little bit about StarCraft II and the design as it relates to that game. I think right now that game is touted, or at least revered in the minds and hearts of players, as a game that's very complex in its design, particularly as it relates to these three, wholly different factions that are somehow balanced. I'd love to get your thoughts on, what the core design values around a game like that are, and as someone who has been in the pit with the Dustin Browders and the David Kims of the world, what made StarCraft the way that it is? Like, what could you attribute for that? Was it just hard work and tenacity? The pen and paper around, yes, we need these very distinct, faction types, and they can't quite even build the same. They need to be all unique, and you just sort of work that over and over and toil the soil over and over until it works. Like, I don't know. I'm just curious to get your inside take on how do you arrive at this end state of a game that is so unique and yet seems to be so balanced.
So for StarCraft II, luckily we had StarCraft, which was the basis for everything. StarCraft had provided a very compelling asymmetric gameplay that really didn't exist in that capacity in the market when it came out. And I think that's why it was so successful, was because it really offered something that didn't exist already. You had different RTS games with different factions that had minorly different things. They still built their farms, they still built their, like even Warcraft II, right? It's mostly very similar. Like you have a town hall, you have farms, they provide food, you make a barracks, it makes orcs or footmen. And so StarCraft kind of developing that asymmetric style is, I think, what was the basis for its success. And so with StarCraft II, it was kind of just building on that, like taking, we know that asymmetric gameplay is super fun, right? Everybody has their identity with like, I'm Protoss main, or I'm Terran all the time, whatever. I was a Zerg main, by the way.
Nice.
And basically just kind of taking the core concepts of what made those races fun, and then building on it,
like leaning into
it. There were so many failed unit ideas. Like I can't even remember how many there were. There were just tons, like so many units that we tried that just didn't work out for some reason, or they weren't fun enough, they weren't engaging enough, they didn't have a clear role. And that comes back to what I was saying earlier, where it's like we're just throwing ideas at the wall and seeing. Every idea had a good intention behind it. It's not like we're just coming up with any possible idea we can think of and trying it out. Like every idea was discussed and thought about, and multiple smart people came to this conclusion of like, yes, we should try that because that could be good. And it was not good, and we learned, and now we move on to the next thing. So with StarCraft II, I think that was kind of a huge part of it was just constantly changing things, constantly trying to figure out what was fun, ironing out those complex unit relationships with like, you know, Marines are super strong in Zerg, but then they get Banelings, and now everything changes, so you need tanks, but then they get Mutalisks, and so like it's this
so many variables.
So it's important that in that situation each unit had its role, so every time you're going to the drawing board from your unit, you're like, well, what is the role this unit is going to serve? You know, you don't just come up with, I have a cool unit idea. I mean, sometimes
you have to like pinpoint it and like be kind of laser focused with it, right?
In a way,
at least that way it's a known quantity in the equation, right? Where it's like, we've made this to be this piece, right?
Yeah.
Because otherwise, like, you would look at the complexity of it all, and like you said, build order, timings, like how long this and that, and how that relates, and then end game, and it's so complicated. Like the amount of permutations and variables, it's fascinating to me because it almost requires a player base to stress test, right?
Oh, it does.
It really does, and that's one thing I want to sort of compliment someone like yourself and David Kim and the likes, Dustin as well, this tenacity to care for your game over the course of the stress testing of public play in a way that, you know, puts up with the criticism and the stress, but then also is big enough to allow the community to learn the game without fixing it for them too quickly.
Yep.
Like how did you guys handle that? Because I think in a game like this, it's really easy to draw quick assumptions or quick conclusions on like, oh, this isn't balanced, or oh, this isn't that. But if you chase every early assumption, you're never quite getting to the true stress test nature of, or the needs around true stress testing it, right? Like maybe there is a way, and maybe if we do this, it makes it worse in another way. Like what was the mentality or the mindset around folks like yourself in relation to that service piece for StarCraft? And how did you restrain yourself, but also do enough work to serve, you know?
So a huge piece of that is just playing the game yourself.
Right.
Getting in there, understanding how you feel, that's going to help you read this feedback and read this perception and kind of make a little bit more sense of it. I mean, obviously every developer should play their game. And I think that's the dream, right? Is like you make this game that you love. I mean, ideally you're making games that you love, right? Hopefully you're not making games that you don't love, but you make this game, you play it, you kind of have your own perspectives. And then again, you're open to other people's, you know, perspectives. You're able to analyze data and see, you know, why is this person feeling this way? Why are they saying this thing? And you know, this is something that isn't really, I think, understood by the greater gaming community at large, but I mean, maybe some, but for the most part, I see this come up all the time, is like, how did the devs not know this thing was blah, 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 right? When you're making a game, you have your entire development team play testing the game. And so let's say you play test 3 times a week, which is a decent amount for an entire team to be play testing. So you have, you know, however many hours that is. Probably in total less than 100 hours, unless you're a very large team. And that's, you know, per day. So maybe 300 hours a week.
Man hours in total.
Man hours in total testing between all the different, you know, groups. And they're all giving feedback. In 1 week of a game going live, you completely dwarf all of that. Like it doesn't even, it's a blip on the map. You know what I mean? Like even after years of testing, it's like 1 to 2 weeks of the public playing the game is more data than you ever could have possibly got from just the dev team.
Totally.
And that's when things get really scary, because that's when you kind of have to take a step back and let things kind of play out a little bit. Because there will be things that will just come out to be, you know, a problem, maybe. For example, a unit might be overpowered, right? So this unit is super overpowered. Everyone's building it. Everyone knows about it. And that creates this weird cascade effect where, like, because everyone knows about it, everyone's using it. And because everyone, like, they're kind of just focusing in on
the other
it.
paths.
So no one's figuring out these other counters and stuff. And so you kind of have to take a very, like, precise action towards those types of things. We see it a lot too with heroes, where, you know, a new hero will come out and it'll be this talent build is just so strong. Everyone's saying, oh, this is the right build if you don't go this build. But it's just because, you know, no one's using the other things, or people haven't figured out the counters yet. And if you take too quick of an action, you're going to, I think, reduce a lot of that emergent gameplay that's going to come out of players trying out other things and learning new things. You don't want to, hold their hand via design, right? You kind of want to let them experience the game and let them try the new things. And yeah, it might be a tough time if this unit's overpowered, everyone's building it, it's in every single game. But if you just go straight to the nerf bat, you know, and you take that unit out of the equation, something else is just going to take its place right away.
Totally, yeah.
So I think that's a place where StarCraft succeeded, was kind of just, you know, massaging everything into place rather than taking like hard cuts onto things. And I mean, like sometimes
very measured approach.
It's super important. And sometimes, and that was happening all throughout development, but it also happened, you know, after launch, that was extremely important. And you know, sometimes there are things that are crazy that just need a big nerf.
Right.
You know, and sometimes that's the right place for that, is like, hey, this thing is clearly overpowered. I mean, sometimes just looking at the numbers can kind of show you that, where you're like, the value of this unit over how much it costs versus how many are made in a game and things like that. But for the most part, you know, again, it's that iterating thing. It's like just little changes, having an idea of what to change to kind of make it feel better or fit more into place.
Have you ever felt like you've been forced by players' sentiment and perception to change your game, even though the numbers or the back end maybe even said something entirely different, but because gamers, as we all know, are passionate individuals, and the perception might just be so strong that to not do anything would be to somewhat give a perception that you aren't listening at all, right? Like, has there ever been a time where you felt like you've had to balance on perception alone? Like, even if the numbers don't quite match up, and you're not going to come out and be like, hey, you guys are wrong. Like, you know, like,
I mean, you never want to do that, right? You never want to just go out and be like, you guys are wrong, and here's why.
Exactly.
But yeah, that's actually something that I think a lot of us have struggled with over time, is this, you know, this balance adjustment that everyone is screaming for. And you go back and you're looking at the numbers at work and you're like, it's not lining up. But you can't just not do anything.
Right.
There are a couple ways of addressing that. One of the ways that's kind of become more of a thing in the last 5 to 8 years, I'd say, is just being more open with the players. If you go back to like the 2000s, early 2000s, and like the 90s, dev teams were very shut off from their communities. If you look at like those games and those dev teams, and you know, the community or the industry was just different back then. It's not to say that they were doing the wrong thing, but over time we've kind of become more outgoing, more communicative towards our player base about what these changes are and why we're making them, and you know, taking their feedback to account and stuff like that. And I think that's a big part of these kinds of perception problems. They happen all the time. Every single game has perception problems, which is just strictly the players perceive this problem that the data isn't backing up. So being communicative, explaining, you know, what the problem they might see is, and you know, like I said, you never want to just straight up be like, you're wrong. Here's why. That's not the right way to do it. But you definitely can't not talk about it.
Exactly.
So there's like, you know, like I said, being communicative. You know, there's a lot of times where sometimes making little buffs to other things. To kind of, you very rarely, if something is really like, everyone thinks it's overpowered, but it's not. You don't really ever want to nerf that, because you already know the numbers are saying it's not. So why would you make it worse?
To make it worse.
And then you know in the back of your mind that all it's going to take is one smart, you know, Twitch streamer or YouTuber to figure out the way to deal with it, and then suddenly like it's no longer overpowered or underpowered. And kind of like directing attention away from it, like maybe buffing some other things in minor ways, just be like, hey, okay, maybe this unit is really overpowered, so we're going to maybe slightly buff some things that are kind of a counter to it, or just to kind of, like I said, it's that massaging everything into place idea. And then, you know, if you make this little buff and it swings the pendulum so far to the other side, that's data. You know, now you know, like, okay, all we got to do is put this back because that was okay. Like, we don't want to do that, right?
We were fine. That was a better problem.
And
interesting.
Over the years, I think the industry has gotten much better at these kind of rapid, agile development, making these small changes and getting them out to the public quickly. I think that's really important for,
super cool,
you know, problems like that. Because back then, you know, 20 years ago, you'd have a balance problem that would last months, sometimes years. Sometimes it would never get changed because the game, they moved on, you know, that they're not working on that game anymore. They're making the expansion. So
I think that's the thing, as a massive sort of player advocate in some ways, as much as I love the the craft of making games, I think it is that thing about the games industry that I love the most, where it's sure there's this sort of lab of passionate scientists cooking up a thing, but it's because we're cooking it up like a beautiful dish to serve, right? And it's the feedback on that dish and how to iterate and improve it, and the sort of the dynamic interaction between that I find so fascinating and so unique to games. Like there really isn't much quite like that.
Yeah, because you imagine like you go to a restaurant, they bring this like fancy dish out and put it on your table. You take a bite and you're like, I don't know. I think these things can be changed. And they take it back to the kitchen and like change it, bring it back.
Yeah. It's kind of. I mean, it's somewhat like that, right? It's super interesting to me. I don't really know of any other consumer-based product that's quite that dynamic and living and sort of constantly alive, and requires really effective listening and communication, particularly in the modern day with these tools that we have to talk to one another and relate. And I think that's going to be an ever more important skill as we move on into these games.
One of the most important, in my opinion, right now. I think constantly being in close contact with your player base about the direction you're taking the game is something that is, I mean, it can be really bad if you don't, right? And it can be amazing when done right. Like you get all this data, all this feedback, and you can go in, you can make changes that people are like going to be excited for, and then it goes out and they're like super excited about it, and the game gets better and everyone's happy. But without that, you're just kind of throwing darts at the board and hoping that something's okay and it's going to work out. Or even
worse, like you're almost designing for yourself in some way, and that's like, what a lonely thing to do, It's like,
I know, right? I mean, I've made so many like maps and mods for these different games, and like, no one's gonna see this. I'm just making it. It gets kind of sad and boring, and like that's why like you move on to the next thing and very rarely ever finish something. Cause
do you have? Is there a distinct top memory out of your time on StarCraft II? Whether that's as a dev, was there a unit or a single change, or something that happened with the dev team or in one of the products? Is there a single moment or two that stands out as super memorable, or something that you'll never forget? Like, I'm just curious. Or a process designing a certain thing that you really loved.
So I will say one of the most memorable things from StarCraft II Wings of Liberty. This is early on before any expansions. This was actually right when the game released. It was beta had just ended, game had just came out. So playing 2v2 with my buddy, and we would go Terran and Protoss. And we would basically just rush Mothership and nukes.
Nice.
And we would do the dreaded Vortex nuke combo, because Vortex pulled every unit in.
Vortex was such a problem.
And then if you could time the nuke correctly, the nuke would come down right when the Vortex releases all of the enemies, like their entire army. And the nuke would just one-shot everything. And so, we would win games with, a single ghost and a Mothership. That was hilarious. We did that so much, and it never got old.
Dude,
got old.
That whole late Wings Broodlord Mothership thing that was going on for a long time with Vortex was it was like every game played out that, like Zerg, Protoss for Zerg.
It caught on like in a big way eventually. Well, I mean, in 1v1 you saw the Vortex plus the Psystorm and the Archons. The Archon toilet is what it was called back then.
Toilet. That's right. That's what we
because you just that was kind of an evolution of well, I mean, you didn't have a nuke, right? So you had to do it. But yeah, that was something else, man. Seeing those huge, especially once you got to see it on the pro stage where like someone pulled it off. That's when you're like, maybe there's a problem here. I don't know if this entire epic game should come down to like one ability.
One Vortex.
And it's not even like there wasn't even a ton of counterplay, right? It's just it appears there, and you're either in it or you're not.
Yes, that's
like true. Your only option is basically somehow kill the Mothership, but it's surrounded by a million stalkers and Archons and everything. So
for such a complex game to end in one moment like that, it's kind of unfortunate.
It was,
but it changed, and
it did change
better.
So that was always. I mean, I'll never forget that. Archon toilet, the Mothership nuke combo. And then I don't know. So like I said, I started when StarCraft II was in development. And I moved from Florida, I lived in kind of a more rural, like touristy area of Florida, so I wasn't near any big cities. And esports wasn't really a big deal back then. So I really got to engage with esports once StarCraft II became a thing that the players had. You know, once pros were starting to get if you wanted to watch StarCraft events like StarCraft 1, you had to go to Korea, right? You had to go, watch OGL or the things over there. Yeah. But if you wanted to watch esports here, there wasn't very much. It was very
MLG. That was the early one.
Yeah, and they were only in like select cities.
Yeah, and it was only very rarely.
Yeah,
it came around once every couple months or something. Yeah.
And it was uncommon. It was only in certain areas of the country. Yeah. And like I said, I started at Blizzard when I was 20. So before that, I didn't really have money to just be like, I'm just gonna go fly to New York today because I want to go see some esports.
Dude.
So kind of just jumping into that environment head first, working on the game and just kind of getting to see from the inside how players are learning things and adapting and changing their strategies, and then going to my first esports event where I got to finally see the game being played and like live was just, I remember like seeing the players in the booths and be like, that's them in there, they're right there, that's so cool. So
oh man, I love it.
My
early StarCraft 2, my annual Christmas gift, well, as the game played on, my Christmas gift from my mom was a GOM TV subscription, because back in the day you could only watch it on their app on your phone. I think they had a web client, but maybe that was kind of crazy or weird, hard to use. But you could pay $200 something for like the full annual subscription, and so that's what I would do, just to be able to watch like the Korean play and stuff like that. And of course, would watch all the MLGs when they came around. But
man, I loved StarCraft esports.
So good. Like, that was a sweet time.
I watched so much, not StarCraft II, StarCraft Brood War.
Oh, right, yeah.
I watched so much of that, like dreaming to one day go to Korea just to see one of these events in person.
Yeah.
But eventually I got to see, Flash and Bisu and Jaedong and all those guys, like, because of StarCraft II. Which
that first MLG when they came over, that was so cool. Like, and I remember, oh man. Yeah, that was so crazy. The announcement, the names, that was a memorable moment.
Yeah,
it was super fun to have them here and to have them starting to play SE2, and what an interesting, memorable time, dude.
It was, and I remember thinking to myself, how many of the Brood War players are going to play StarCraft II? Because I don't think that had happened in the history of games yet, where like it wasn't a guaranteed jump, because the game was so different.
Right.
And a lot of the Brood War players had a lot of criticism toward it because of that. The unlimited unit selection, the macro enhancements that were added, some of the core gameplay things from StarCraft were changed, and
big difference.
There was a big question mark of like, who's going to come play StarCraft II, who's going to stay playing Brood War, what kind of new players are going to come into the game, and kind of watching that whole situation unfold was a very interesting time for gaming. I think
it's weird, really weird, fascinating too.
There's if you were into it,
too, about the whys, and there's a whole deep conversation on dissecting that, I think. That even I don't feel like I know enough about, and it would be really cool to have that conversation. Anyways, let's StarCraft II. Any fun stories on Dustin Browder, David Kim? Like, I'm curious, what are some inside Kyle stories working with those two? Any quirks? No worries if not.
We all sat in the same bullpen.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of just crazy moments that would happen in games where we'd be testing something and like laughter would just erupt in the whole bullpen.
Dustin's laugh is so
like
radiates.
Like if you weren't laughing, it would make you laugh because you just couldn't help but feel engaged with whatever it was that was happening, even if you were just a bystander. That was always good times.
That's awesome.
Those are some fun times. We started testing heroes in that same bullpen.
Yeah, I remember, dude.
Way before it was, even no one knew about it.
Yeah, that was first floor, building 1, right? Like, where you guys
down
were?
there.
Yeah.
And then, we had, the StarCraft II multiplayer team, which I was a part of at the time, was kind of downstairs in that area. And then we had the heroes team, which at the time was Blizzard Dota, and then eventually Blizzard All-Stars, and then eventually Here's the Storm. But they were kind of sitting in that same half. Like, we had one half, they had the other half. And I ended up getting pulled into a lot of the initial playtests for that game. And that's kind of what led me to start working on that game, was because I think they had like 8 or so people, and they needed just like 2 more. So they'd grab me because I was sitting right there, and I was like, yeah, I'll do it, whatever.
Sure.
And I think they would sometimes grab like whoever was available. That kind of got me into the game.
That's awesome. So when did you formally make the switch? I know that You were on StarCraft for quite some time before you switched over, like formally.
Yeah, I think I was on StarCraft I started in like early 2012, and I think I was on it until it was a weird switch because it wasn't a hard switch. At the time, I was actually working on Legacy of the Void campaign.
Right.
Because at the time, like, multiplayer was very much in concept, and it was just like there wasn't a lot of work that needed to be done there. But the campaign was like the big part, right? It's like we have all these story missions and all this stuff that has to be done. So I was helping out with kind of getting that stood up and running. And in between that, I would kind of take on some heroes tasks. I actually, one of the first things I remember doing for the game was we had just started going away from the old generic talent system.
Yeah.
And we started going into this like new, every hero has their own custom
specific talent trees,
special talents that affect their abilities.
Yeah.
And so I had changed over Sergeant Hammer and Nova to this new system. So kind of going through their entire talent tree. I didn't do the design for it because I was too caught up in like StarCraft stuff, but they needed, they needed this stuff implemented because it was a sweeping change across every hero.
Yeah.
So all of their, tech designers, which were designers that implemented basically all the changes that the game designers, had requested, were just completely bogged down with their own,
catching
they can only do so many at a time.
Yeah.
So I kind of took those on. That was one of the first things I did. And I kind of just took these little piecemeal tasks here and there. I think I formally switched over. I remember when I went to work and was like, I want to work on this game as my primary game now. Yeah. And that was after the BlizzCon where we announced it as Heroes of the Storm.
Right.
Which was the cinematic.
Yeah.
Because I was in the main hall.
That was pretty dope.
And that was one of the coolest moments I've ever had in my life, just from like, as a gamer. Yeah. Like, regardless of anything else, there was just a weird energy in that room that
was crazy.
It can't be denied. You had to be there, because I've watched videos of it to try to like relive that, like, oh, just I need another hit of that. But you just can't. It doesn't
get it.
It doesn't feel the same.
Yeah.
And after that, I went back to work the following Monday.
Yeah.
And I was like, I want to work on this game because that felt so good. And I was already playing it all day at home. I would go home because the internal alpha was going on. I would go home and just play it for all night.
What was when you switch over? What was your first hero to work on? What was your first task? What was some of the first things you tackled?
So, similarly to StarCraft II, I had a very kind of journey through the heroes landscape. So I started off as a technical designer. So I was kind of just implementing changes that were needed for the game, and I started off kind of helping out mostly with the map side of things because there was only, we were kind of under this idea that, hey, maps are really cool. We want to make more.
Right.
But they take a long time and there's a lot to them. And at the time, only one person was making maps.
Yeah.
And that was just kind of unacceptable. So hey, why don't you come over and start helping out with maps? Do whatever you can.
Was that Kent?
No. So Kent had actually moved over. Actually, what was he doing? I don't remember what he was doing specifically. I think he was kind of starting to do hero stuff. And I was... I
feel like I remember interviewing him.
He might have been doing
Black Hearts Bay.
I know he did a lot of tutorials
layout for that
and like a lot of... he was kind of doing a lot of just general stuff.
Right,
like he was working on a little bit of everything. He was kind of a workhorse in that way back then. And I think he was helping out with maps as well. And that was kind of... I think I took a little bit of weight off when I came in, was to kind of like free up some people to focus on more specialized things.
Yeah.
So I started working on maps. The first map I started working on which wasn't out yet, was Garden of Terror.
Right.
So that was when I was formally on the team. Before that map came out, I was switched over.
Got it.
And then in addition to working on maps, because maps are really weird. You do the layout, and it's kind of like unartified, right? It's just grass and bushes and nothing, right? It's just like super basic textures. And it's kind of just there to do layout testing and mechanic testing. So we would have the mechanic in. And by the way, the plant vehicle went through a million different iterations. Even to this day, it changed not even a year ago, I think, or so. So we were kind of just testing all these different ideas for that. And then after layout and mechanic testing is done, that's kind of when it would hand over to the art team, because it's like, we're not changing it anymore. So go crazy with it, make it look super pretty.
Yeah.
And they would go in and like add all the little details and stuff like that. And a lot of weird stuff that you wouldn't think about is like, and something that I was in charge of was like on Garden of Terror, there's these like greenhouses all around the map. And at nighttime, the tentacle vines like come out of it.
Totally.
So I had to set up a system to communicate to all those doodads, that's what they're called, that, hey, it's now nighttime and you should now start playing this animation.
Right.
So I was kind of doing a lot of stuff like that. I wasn't really designing as much. I was helping. I was giving feedback. I was providing, my thoughts, my perspective, and kind of helping to come up with ideas. We would brainstorm, and like we would kind of all come to like, yeah, let's try that. That sounds cool. Like I said, a bunch of smart people all decide on a thing. It might suck, but we all.
Yeah.
So and then I basically did that for a long time. I worked on Garden. I worked on the 2 Diablo maps, Battlefield of Eternity, and Infernal Shrines. Worked on Braxis. Worked on Sky Temple. Tomb of the Spider Queen. Did some little like tech stuff with heroes in between, kind of just all over the place. I did some AI stuff like with the minion system.
Wow.
Added tons of dev cheats for us to like try stuff easier.
Yeah.
Just kind of all over the place basically, but primarily focused on maps.
Got it.
And then we needed a new hero designer. And so I applied because at the time it was like considered like a career switch, I guess, because tech designer is like these guys, and then game designers are these guys. And I was like, well, I want to be a game designer. So I applied and got the job. First hero I worked on was Zul'jin. Well, the first hero I did like from start to finish was Zul'jin. When I switched over, I was working on the talent tree for Medivh and kind of like figuring out where to, because he was one of the first quests.
Right.
Or no, he had one of the first quests, which was level 7 talent.
Yeah.
And then Kel'thuzad was the first quest that we ever did. So kind of like coming up with a quest. So the actual quest that he had, the Master's Touch, was that was kind of like my, like, here's my first thing. Yeah. It's a quest, because we were all about quests.
Yeah. So. No, I remember that switch very, very distinctly. And, I want to talk a bit about like sort of the core design conceits as it relates to this particular genre in Heroes, because I think I remember a distinct time early on in Heroes' life, and maybe it was prior to this switch to hero-specific talent trees and things like that, where the game kind of looked a lot like your traditional MOBA. Yeah. Had very similar kind of vibe to it. And I remember a very distinct moment when, Dustin and the team were kind of just saying, nope, we're going to do something different here. We're going to commit to this idea of like team leveling and removing the shop and, putting hero talents. Like, I'm curious to get your take on the DNA of those decisions and how that manifested through your time, like this desire to make something new. Yeah. Like, can you speak to that a bit more? I'm sure there are people out there that are just like, well, why didn't you stick to these kind of more core tenets to what a MOBA did? Why did Heroes make these decisions? And, how did that make the game better? Are you dumbing down the game? Like, what were the reasons behind these decisions? And, what kind of motivated those things?
So I think a big reason was because, at least in my eyes, because I can't speak for everyone, but from my perspective, a big reason for some of these changes was to ease the kind of parts of the game that felt a little clunky or a little unconventional, unintuitive. Yeah. Like if you go and play,
like last hitting doesn't really
make
a lot of sense.
I was a huge Dota fan. When it was Warcraft 3 Dota, I played so much of it, and coming from that environment into working on Heroes was like, we had a shop and you could buy items and they upgraded and there was a lot of complexity there. We had a huge talent tree that was like the World of Warcraft talent tree. We tried these things, and ultimately it felt like it took away from what we wanted the game to be about, which was just like big team fights. Like that was a huge thing, was like, we just want you to get in there and not have to worry about like knowing a million things before you like log into the game. Like we just want you to jump in, pick a hero. The talents are kind of like, they just change your abilities and you can see exactly what they do. And you just, you're not focused on all these other little minutia. You're just focused on, the meat of the game, which is these epic team fights with these, characters from
fighting and take out the other team's base. Like,
it's very like, what to do. Right. And I think making the game more intuitive overall was a big goal. And that's kind of where those decisions came from, is, making it easier to jump in and not have to either already have this burden of knowledge or figure out stuff up
or get criticized for not playing the right way.
Because like, how do you know what to buy? Right. And if you go play Dota right now and you've never played before, right, you're going to have to, to trial and error your way through, or just look up guides, which is totally fine. And they have a really cool thing, that helps you learn, but it's still a big burden of knowledge to jump in for the first time. So I think a lot of it was just kind of easing that barrier of entry, and a lot of those decisions were a result of that. Early on, kind of just limiting your hero pool and having like easier to play heroes that, they're not, also removing last hitting.
Right. Team leveling was another big one.
Team leveling was huge because you knew exactly where you stood in relation to the enemy. Right. There's no question of like, well, that guy, I just easily, wiped him out, but this guy came in and just two-shot me. Like, what? I don't understand. Sure. And it's really hard to understand if you're not familiar with the game. Right. And it takes a long time to get familiar. Yeah. So the team leveling, I think, was a positive change. I still think it's a very positive change overall. I think, it makes the game feel less stressful for like, maybe at the highest, most competitive level, there might be like reasons that it could be better or worse if not for it. But I feel like, for the vast majority of players, which is, literally like 96+%. Right. It's just easier to get into and easier to digest and easier to understand.
Totally. So, no, I get it. I think the thing I respected the most about that time and the commitment of Dustin to make something new was just like to do that. Like the genre didn't need another clone of the game. Like if you want to play that game, go play that game. Right. Like this is at least going to be a Blizzard effort to try to clarify and refine the genre in a way that solves for some of these problems. And I just had immense respect for that because I think that's almost like bringing a contribution to the industry that is new rather than just not. Like that's being creative. Yeah, that's pushing and moving the ball forward, right? And I love
that's another big part of game design that I think a lot of people don't fully understand is there's a lot of people that are working at this company that want to make cool stuff.
Right.
They don't just want to make a remake of something that's made. They want to make something that is unique to them, new, is fun to work on.
Yeah.
So a lot of these decisions come from those types of places as well. It's not just how do we make the most efficient, optimized, perfect game, right? It's like we just want to make what's fun, what's interesting, what it compels us to come to work every day, and what we're inspired by, and things like that. Sometimes you watch a movie and you're like, that's so cool, I want to put it in the game. It might not be the right game for it, but you figure out a way to get it in, and like, sweet, it's awesome. And then gets out there and people are like, why did they add this? This is so weird and dumb. And you're like, oh crap. But it's like that's kind of a big place that comes from. It's just we're trying to make new stuff. We're trying to have fun making the game that we're working on. It's not always about the most perfect game. Which brings me to another interesting thought that I've had, which is like, if you look at physical sports or physical games, right? Because soccer is a sport, football is a sport. There are games as well, baseball.
There are games,
I think like you see like these minor like rules changes with those, but like the game has stayed the same. And I wonder if in 50 years or 100 years from now, right? Where will video games be in that paradigm? Like, are we going to inevitably boil down games to this space where this is the perfect game and why would you play anything else?
Right.
Or like, you know what I mean? Isn't that
genres
crazy?
Get that way? Like, right, maybe MOBAs will always MOBAfy, and the perfect MOBA follows these rules.
The perfect FPS.
Yeah, and maybe graphics upgrade or fidelity changes and stuff like that, but these rules stay the same. I could see, certain games slotting in that way, or certain modes or genre types slotting in that way.
And I think, I wonder if there are people who work on games or who are interested in kind of taking it in that direction, right? Because there surely are some people who look at a game and they say, this could be improved, this could be improved, this could be improved. And that's very easy to do, right? You look at anything and say that something can be improved, but maybe some people are really inspired to actually go and improve those specific things and kind of create this perfect game, whatever that means.
It's certainly the kind of thing that esports sort of cries out for in some way, because it's like, oh, I can make my career being great at that thing, and it's not going to, like, the rug's not going to get pulled out from under me in some way, right?
Exactly.
So I mean, I think there's a market for that kind of stability.
It's just an interesting thought, because you don't see people, playing a game of baseball and then being like, man, this needs to be nerfed. Like, shortstop needs to be nerfed. It's OP.
Exactly.
It's interesting to look at games from that perspective and like the way that, people cry out for changes to games, or to say that something shouldn't be done because, nobody asked for that or whatever. Yeah. And then looking at these games that never get changed, and like they're still games. They
Monopoly.
Totally. I mean, you see like variations of it, right? Surely there's been video games made after physical games and sports that change the rules. But the physical aspect of those sports has not changed.
Super interesting.
In many years. Maybe little changes, I guess. but not in the last, I'd say, I mean, I don't really know. I'm talking without
Would you
actually
credit that
about,
to just incredible
how many years
design?
did, how many years ago was like the last major change for one of these sports?
Yeah.
And then that's been it,
For sure.
since then. Ever since I've been alive, football and baseball and all this has basically been exactly the same.
Let's talk about some of your highlights on heroes. Like you've contributed some pretty fascinating heroes to the roster on this game. Heroes like Kel'thuzad, heroes like Orphea, Zul'jin, like you mentioned. Let's see, who else? Deathwing most recently, right? Orphea, of course. Do you have what is your approach to hero making? I mean, these are pretty standout heroes. People really love them. They're strong, unique contributions, I think, to the roster. What is the way in which you approach trying to figure out how to bring something new? Is it focusing on fantasy? Is it focusing on unique elements that bring more diversity to the game? Like, is it a mix of both? Do you try to stay flexible in that, or do you always approach it initially from a singular perspective?
It's definitely a mix.
Okay.
It's actually very nerve-wracking to take on a hero like Kel'thuzad, who many, many, many thousands, if not millions of players have a very soft spot in their heart for.
Right.
This is a character that they've grown to love through the storylines of other great games. And so trying to take on this burden of, I mean, it's not a burden necessarily, but it's like you got to take this thing that people care deeply about and somehow make it a thing that they still care deeply about, or that is just as awesome as they hoped it would be.
Yeah, and certainly doesn't detract from that, right? Like, because that would be the worst.
That would be the worst case scenario. Is you
take a step backward.
So it can be stressful depending on the hero, and then coming from a gameplay perspective, we're looking at, like you said, what kind of new elements do we want to add to the game? We don't want to just release the same hero over and over and over again. They all need to bring something new to the table. And so what is that new thing this time? And that's challenging in its own way, because how many times can you reinvent the wheel?
Yeah.
Right? Like, how many different versions of a skill shot can you make before you've just completely I don't know.
Right.
Before you're doing crazy stuff that's and then you test it and you're like, this will never work. This is way too crazy. And then the third and final part is the fantasy was the first part, gameplay and figuring out new stuff to add to the game, but then also just you're kind of limited because that character is who they are in whatever game they're coming from.
Right, yeah.
So
they have a gameplay history in some ways, or even a cutscene history. We saw them do this or that, right?
Like Imperia is a perfect example of someone who, I mean, you see him do cool stuff in cutscenes, but you don't really know what he does on a gameplay.
And it's almost like if you didn't do what he did in a cutscene, you'd somehow be failing his identity because you only saw them do that one thing. So,
and then to even one up that one is, with Deckard Cain, he's literally a quest NPC that doesn't do anything. He walks around, he gets caught by enemies, and you save him, and then he gives you quests, right? Trying to think what does he do? It's crazy. It's fun. I don't think there's really, I mean,
there's no one way,
I can't think of any other game that's like it in terms of designing for it. I think it was a very unique experience thus far, because what other game? I guess maybe Smash is a game where you kind of get to have
makes
that.
Sense. Yeah.
But man, what else is there?
It's super interesting, especially with the sense of history and sort of tenure that a lot of these characters have. You're re-envisioning them and actually making them much more personal than they've ever been, and because you're putting them in the hands of players. And I think that's, like you said, I can imagine that being super exciting and awesome, but also very daunting. You're like, dude, you are playing as Illidan, right? Like this thing that this mythic figure that up until now was a raid boss that you just hoped you'd see one day, kind of thing, right? I can totally picture that, man. What else about the sort of design culture on Heroes or your experience with this game? And I know you're still cranking away on it, and I know Deathwing has been a super interesting addition to the game. It's been really cool to see the community's response and feedback and enthusiasm and questions.
Heroes is in this interesting spot where it's got a ton of heroes to play as, and they all have really unique and different roles. And continuing to elaborate on those things as you get to a point where you're like, is this really the best thing we can do for the game?
Right.
Or is this really what needs to be done. Like,
Sure.
are there other things that could bring more value? And
Totally.
I think for me, that's kind of a spot I find myself thinking in a lot, is like,
how do you min-max
we
your
can add new
contributions?
mechanics and heroes, forever.
Yeah.
But what else is there? Are there other things we could try to figure out? And I think that to me is like something that I think is the most exciting, is kind of
focusing down on that.
Yeah.
Because then it feels like all of the contributions that are being made are being invested in the right ways.
Yeah.
Right?
Because it's like, if you think about a hero, not every hero is played in every game, and some heroes have much lower play rates than others.
Sure.
And so it's like, if you add a hero that has a very low play rate because, they're too hard, maybe they're just really high skill cap.
Sure.
So not many people feel comfortable playing them. And so it's like, you spent 9 months making a hero that, 2% of the population plays.
Yeah.
Is that the best possible way to improve the game?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the space I find myself thinking in, is like, what kind of overarching, like, big time things can we do that would bring a lot more value to a lot more people?
Yeah.
That isn't to say that, like, adding heroes to the game is always going to be a thing, and that's super fun and super exciting and always changes things, right? So that'll never stop. But when it comes to my personal feelings about, that's kind of where I find myself continuing to end up, right?
Yeah.
Because like, like, I go home and I think about things. I'm like, oh, like, what could the new hero be? Who would it be, right?
Yeah.
That comes from a lot of different places. There's passion, a bit between people at work that are like, we really want to do this hero, and there's passion in the community, obviously, like insane amounts of passion for like, this hero must be done, or we're gonna riot. So that's never gonna change.
Yeah.
But
that's cool. I like it. I think it's wise. I think it's smart. Let's say you're pulled into a space where someone drops tons of money on you. You get to make the dream of your lifetime, design the game of your ultimate dreams. What is that game? And, where does it fit? Is it a competitive game, story game, fantasy game? What is it? I'm curious to get your thought on just if all the context in your life was pulled out and you had ultimate freedom, sort of dream designer scenario, where would you start? And is there a space where you feel like you'd like to innovate? Or is it, obviously that's a massive question, but just want to get your take.
Well, I think the first way I would look at that question is the genre or the theme that it would be.
Yeah.
Well, I guess not necessarily the genre, like the theming. And I've always had a soft spot for like sci-fi space.
Yeah, totally.
So, I love fantasy too.
Yeah.
I love Game of Thrones. I love Swords and Shields. I love Magic. I love D&D. But I find myself fascinated by, what's outside of the world.
Yeah.
And so definitely something that had to do with, I guess, like, I know games like this have been made before, but like controlling some kind of massive space empire and like flying spaceships around, getting down on the planet in the boots on the ground type of situation, building, I don't know. I think
I see what you're saying.
I love like management type games and like building games where you're trying to, like Sim City and like Civilization and things like that. I love those types of games. So something along those lines. But then I also, like, the thing I find myself with Civ and SimCity and like these kind of like, right now I'm actually playing a game called Anno 1800, which is this like crazy like production cycles and production game where you're just making these huge, production chains basically.
Yeah.
Kind of like Factorio.
Yeah, totally. I've played Factorio.
Yeah, I've played a ton of Factorio. I've done pretty much everything.
Yeah.
So something, like, I just find myself drawn to those types of games.
Yeah, totally.
So I really would love to do something like that. That's multiplayer, because all of these games for the most part are either like very contained environment multiplayer or like not multiplayer.
Right.
Or the multiplayer just I haven't found that game that's like satisfying enough. You know what I mean? Like I jump from game to game, like maybe this game will be it. Maybe this game will be it. And I'm trying it and it's like, it's missing these things, or they all do really innovative and cool things, but I have yet to find that like perfect game.
Have you played RimWorld and Oxygen Not Included? Have you messed with that game at all from play? The game's super fascinating.
Super awesome.
Yeah.
I love those types of games too.
Yeah,
like those,
super approachable, but like way complex
insane,
too. It's like the mix of, you're like, hey, I thought this was gonna be like, you look at the art style, you're like, I thought this was gonna be some like easygoing game. You're like, no, dude, not even the oxygen molecules are counted in this game.
So you like,
I love that.
You get to that point where you're playing and you find yourself just like taking your hands off the keyboard and mouse, and you're like, okay, so if I do this,
Yeah.
then this will happen.
Yeah.
And I need to make sure this. So, but how do I? And then it's like 5 minutes later, and like, oh, I gotta like keep not letting my people
Your
die.
people are like throwing up and sick. Yeah, no, I get it.
I love that. I love those like those brain
Yeah.
like I don't even know, like
Yeah.
it's like a treadmill for your brain.
Totally,
you know?
man. That I think, that's exactly how I would describe Oxygen Not Included. It's a total treadmill for your brain where you start to feel like you're a real scientist. You're like, no, I know chemistry now.
Yeah.
I'm like, not really, dude. But,
Yeah. But what's interesting is like those types of things will get you to look
Yeah.
into those things.
Yeah, yeah.
Like I didn't play guitar until I played Guitar Hero.
Interesting.
Played Guitar Hero enough, and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna learn real guitar, and I learned real guitar.
That's so
like,
cool, man.
you know, I
Way to
think
go, video games. See?
games can
They
do
are
that.
good.
They
are.
can.
Yeah, they totally can, dude. Oh, that's awesome, man. What
but to
other
go
games
back-
are you playing right now?
Yeah, Anno 800. I play Pokemon Go like all the time.
Cool, man.
Play it
Yeah.
everywhere. It's one of my favorite phone games because it's just like easy to pick up and set down.
Yeah.
And they constantly are doing like really interesting stuff. So
They are, man.
lots
Yeah.
of community days with different bonuses and things like that. So there's always a reason to kind of check it out.
I'm still surprised more companies haven't gotten into that game type. Obviously, Niantic is sort of king of
They are.
the hill at this point in that way, but it is kind of fascinating that others haven't. And I wonder if it's just because it seems so daunting, the idea of location-based gaming. And I'm sure there's all these legal issues around, liability and the like that I'm sure Niantic is just like light years ahead of any other company trying to accomplish.
For sure.
But
I would think that I've actually spent time thinking about a game like Pokemon Go.
Yeah.
Just like in my own spare time, like what could a game be that isn't just, because the advantage that Pokemon Go has is that they're kind of leaning into the Pokemon franchise, which is one of the biggest, if not, I'm pretty sure it is the biggest franchise in the entire world.
Certainly money-making wise, I think.
And so that kind of helps a lot. So coming up with something brand new and trying to make something that's like not known is already going to be like the biggest hurdle. But more than that, I find myself in Pokemon Go feeling like, the gameplay isn't really, there's not a lot of gameplay.
Yeah.
The gameplay is kind of just like I throw the ball, or I activate some things. It's not really, or I walk around
You
and
walk
click
around
things,
and
right?
look for
Like
a
it's
thing,
not, I've been trying to think of ways to make the gameplay more interesting, but also keep it geolocation based, but without making you have to like stay in the same area, right? Because, like as a designer, as any armchair designer, like even as a professional designer, I am still an armchair designer.
Games,
I've thought of things for Pokemon Go, like, oh, it would be cool if you could incubate eggs in different Pokemon stops,
Totally,
like the Pokestops, right? Like, because normally if you don't buy more extra incubators, you kind of just have this one, and you're kind of just cycling eggs out of it. And I was like, man, I just find myself with a full egg inventory all the time, and I don't know what to do. Like, I just have to wait, and some of them are 5K and 10K, and I don't walk that much, so. I was like, what if I could leave an egg
Just drop it
at
off.
a stop? And it would like incubate for me, and I would have to come back to that stop to pick it up.
That's kind of cool.
Which immediately led me to think, but then what if I'm just like on vacation and I fly home and like, oh shit, I left all my eggs, and
Maybe you could get a friend from Germany to pick it up for you, and that could be a cool way for multiplayer in some ways.
So that's what I was talking about though, with like those ideas where like, this is a great idea, and then immediately you're like, no, it's not a good idea at all.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, that's cool, man.
But yeah, Pokemon Go, I mean, that's just kind of like my always
Yeah.
kind of going on in the background game. Like I said, Anno 1800 is what it has like my full attention right now.
Yeah.
I've been watching that game since it came out and since it was in development. And in December, they just had like a big patch that added the final DLC of season 1, I think is how I understand it. So it's like mini expansions. And so, I was like, well, now that it's all done, I'll go ahead and check it out.
That's cool, man.
So that way I get it all at once.
Yeah.
And then Pokemon Sword and Shield, I'm actually laddering a lot in that game.
Oh, that's cool, dude.
I think Pokemon competitively is a very fascinating game to play.
Interesting, dude.
It's really...
I don't know a lot about competitive Pokemon.
It's insanely hard. Honestly... I mean, there's a lot of games that are insanely hard. You would say StarCraft II is insanely hard.
Yeah.
Most people would. And it is. It's an insanely hard game, not only because of all the relationships you have to think about, but also the micro, right? And the macro.
actual
like,
technical.
holy crap. The technical. Pokemon is zero technical.
Yeah.
It is just literally pure strategy.
Wow. Yeah.
And I find myself getting my ass kicked so hard that I'm just like, man, like this game is insane.
Wow.
And it's like, it's just his decisions versus mine, or their decision versus mine. And oh man, sometimes I walk away feeling so defeated in that game.
You're like, I'm so unsmart.
I'm
so unstrategical.
But
Yeah,
it's exhilarating because there's so much to building your team. There's so much to what moves they have, what items they're carrying, what their abilities are, who you choose to use, because you build a team. So I play doubles, which is that's the competitive format. You have 6, which is like the standard size. You have 6 Pokemon, and then you bring 4 to the fight.
I see.
So you can see your opponent's 6, and that's kind of like the countdown. Like the game's going to start in 1 minute and 30, so pick your 4. You're looking at, okay, what's he going to bring? What are they thinking? And then, sometimes you just completely got outsmarted, and their lead is just way better than yours.
They're kind of getting you to think they're going to go a certain way, but then hook you in a different way. That's interesting.
It's crazy. There's so much to that game. It's nuts.
But
I'm just like very much into that game. I think just from a competitive standpoint, it's really challenging. And I would love, that's another like area that I think there's not a lot of games like Pokemon, especially the competitive format. Yeah. And I think more games like that. Like,
have you seen this new Tim game that's coming out? I think it's called
Tim.
Yeah, it's like
I don't know what to think of that yet.
I haven't. I just got a stress test key. I think they're going to do a stress test this weekend or something.
Oh, I should look into that then.
But yeah, it hasn't launched yet. But, there are people playing it, and but it's the first game I've really seen that's blatantly trying to enter that category, but do it in a new way.
So, I need to check that out, actually. I mean, I have been keeping my eye on it. I didn't know they were doing a stress test. So
I think they're starting to open it. I just put my email in and got an email like 2 days ago or something. But.
Well, have you played Final Fantasy?
Oh, yeah.
Like the RPGs?
Yeah.
So imagine like a competitive version of that, right? Where it's like your 3 characters versus their 3 characters, and like you have to think, what are they going to do?
Mobile gacha games are sort of like that, even though they're so grindy in that way. But like, I was playing a ton of Overhit, which is a Nixon game for a while, and got really into it. Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes is sort of like that in some ways, but the money component of that is so frustrating.
That's the downside. Is, at least for me, I get it, right? Like I fully understand why it's there, but I'm looking at strictly
just
what's the funnest gameplay possible.
Yeah.
And I still think there's a lot of space there to
a lot
explore.
Of room to grow. That's cool.
Especially in a multiplayer capacity, because a lot of those games are single player. A lot of them, and they're really great. Like there are so many amazing JRPGs, RPGs, the games on the mobile games, like there's so many and they're so good. But there's so few that let me face off in a competitive way.
Dude, that's really interesting, actually, to think about a competitive hero game like that that's truly built around the competitive side and balanced in a way where you couldn't pay to win your victory, but like really focused on heightening that. I think that's super fascinating.
And I think
that feels like a new spot.
It's also interesting too because there's not a high barrier of entry theoretically. Like you could make the game insanely complex, and like in order to learn this game, you must read 1,800 page manual. But just from a like mechanic standpoint, you load, you click some things, and then you're strategizing against your opponent. And yes, that's back to like the Pokemon Go thing where you're just like clicking things on the screen, but like this is like I'm making decisions that matter, and I'm going to win or lose, and then those, the win or loss is going to have some consequence. So I care a lot more.
Yeah.
Right.
That's super interesting, man.
Yeah, I would love to see something.
I think
like
that's a thing for sure. Yeah.
It's got to be. I'm sure they're like every time I think these types of thoughts,
someone's already working on it.
2 or 3 years later, like some game gets announced, and it's like, oh man, I was just like that much too slow.
No,
maybe I should start working on one of those now.
Dude, for sure.
Crap. Don't delete this video.
Well, Kyle, I'm a big fan, dude. I can't thank you enough for your contributions to the industry, on the design that you've done. I'm very excited to continue to watch what you do and what you bring to the table. It's an honor to call you a friend and a colleague, and I really appreciate the years that we've had to work on games together. And we've got many more. It's gonna be awesome, and we work in such a cool industry, so. I'm stoked. I really appreciate you believing in this and coming and sharing your story.
I'm so excited. As soon as I saw you were doing this stuff, I was like, dude, that's so cool. You get on there.
Oh, man.
I just want to chat with you. That's really
dude, of course. We should do more of this and talk games more often. So,
for sure.
Guys, if people want to reach out to you, Kyle, what is the best way typically? Do you do Twitter, Reddit?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. It's just at OKD8S, which is like my name. K-Dates, OK Dates.
Got it.
And then, that's mainly where I'm at, I guess. I'm usually much more of a browser than I am a poster.
Sure.
But I'm trying to change that. It's hard.
Dude.
Like, I don't know. I just don't have that personality trait that's like post to Twitter now when you're thinking of something. Like I think of things and then I just forget to post them.
Honestly, I don't post a ton on Twitter either until I started doing this. But Yeah, because I'm always like, well, what do people want to hear from me, man?
Yeah.
You know, but like
that's how I feel too.
But I think with this, it's been fun to kind of share things because I think folks like yourself have so many interesting things to say, and it's fun to share things that I think really have value rather than just some random thought out of my head.
I mean, I wouldn't say that. I think, I don't know. I always feel like, I mean, it's total imposter syndrome, right? Where it's like nothing I do matters and everything sucks.
Honestly, you've had an experience working on games that so many people care about, and you know, behind the curtain mystery of how those games get made is very few people have seen. So it's super awesome.
That's why it's cool to talk about it.
Yeah, it's super cool.
Yeah,
we look forward to. We'll have to do this again. Maybe a few episodes
definitely.
down the road.
We'll talk about that competitive RPG game that I'll be working on.
That sounds good, man. All right, well, dude, thank you so much. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll be back with more soon, hopefully.
Bye, guys.